storyline that interests you the most? During the break, I'll be honest with you, there has been such a push of so much when it comes to realignment, and it's still there with whatever happens with the ACC, if anything, or the 4 schools in the Pac-12, what happens with them in different ways, or maybe they are a part of another conference together. But, Craig, it is the opening week of the season. There are some pretty damn good games. My favorite team plays tomorrow at Minnesota. It has been a game that Nebraska can't win because they're fundamentally inept, and maybe Matt Rule can help turn that around. I don't expect it right away. So that's one of the games. Florida, Utah. Let's get into that one right off the top, because Utah now a part of the Big 12 next year, 2-time defending Pac-12 champions, and Florida beat them last year, and they need to get off to a good start because of their schedule being as hard as it is.
Yeah, Florida beat them on the back of Anthony Richardson, who had one of the best plays he had all year in that game. That was where I was like, man, that was Vince Young-esque what he did there. Florida had the year that they had at the end of it. 6-6, made a bowl game. They're rolling out Graham Mertz. It's on the road this time. And no Cam Rising. I think this one's going to be really close again. I don't know what's going to happen if Graham Mertz in his experience wins out over all the rest, but it's going to be really good. And I think that, I'm interested to see what Billy Napier has in the tank. Outside, we keep talking about the quarterback because, Jaden Rashada, not only is he not there, he's starting at Arizona State. So he might have even had that same shot at Florida, who might have even had a worse depth chart than Arizona State did. So you've got that story, but what has he done with the rest of the roster? Is the rest of the roster better in year 2? Can they hang a little bit? They've got a really tough schedule, and it starts on Thursday. But, yeah, I'm really curious about that one.
Yeah, I think we need to get you into some realignment detox because we were
so. I can walk off right now and do that. Yeah,
we were so inundated with it during the off season that you're sitting here like, man, I don't know. There's really nothing going on. It's like it's game week. It's the first week of the season. There is a ton going on, but yeah, it's just not as, just as easy to, I guess, to just go in a ton of different directions as it is with all of the realignment questions that were out there for a while, especially with the Big 12.
One of the times, maybe a month ago, somebody called, actually on the chat room said this, you guys aren't talking about realignment. It was when, this would have been after the Big 12 added 4. I found you guys because of realignment, and I know a lot of you did, but you don't just talk to talk. It's one of the things we try not to do is just discuss it, although we do know that there is some news out there. But my God, yes, we've also been waiting for games. And so let's go over this one. Let's go over a couple of them. I said Florida, Utah. Craig, obviously UTSA. Houston's one that I think has a lot of interest. Utah, Florida is the one that I brought up the most. But is there another game this weekend? LSU, Florida State, we've discussed it, and there's a few others too.
Well, yeah, let's just settle on one and then kind of maneuver our way around.
Pick a game.
And Florida, playing outside the state of Florida in the non-con for the first time in a very long time was an interesting note, about this game that they were so settled in for so many years, and now this is like venturing out and spreading their wings and leaving the Sunshine State for the first time in, 30-plus years.
Yeah. Usually their non-conference game, they have one every year, Florida State, so that's going to obviously be in Florida. They rotate through kind of picking up USF, UCF, and Miami in home and home
Makes
hits.
sense.
They go through those, and then and then the other ones they just bring in, tomato cans to beat, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah, I mean basically, but and to the thing about realignment, for those who are like, where's it at? When there's something to talk about, we'll talk about it. But that was the thing is there was a daily, thanks to the Big 12 and Endeavor and various other outlets, there were things to talk about every day until the bubble finally burst, and now there's just less interesting parts that are still out there, all due respect. It's just there's not the passion out in Palo Alto or Berkeley for, what's going on as much as there was in Stillwater and Waco and Lubbock and et cetera. But as far as Florida and Utah, I'm super amped up for this, Cam Rising or not. I think the fact that there's no Cam Rising makes this just way more interesting and more of a toss-up type of a game. Florida venturing out, Utah being at home, Bryson Barnes, he's played, but just he's not Cam Rising. So, I think it'll be the ball of knives that we've come to expect from the Utes. I think that it's not such a drop drop-off that, like, oh, God, they're doomed now against Florida, because Florida itself has plenty of question marks at quarterback as well with Graham Mertz. So, yeah, I don't have, like, strong thoughts on this is going to happen. I'm just, in week one, and yeah, it is week one because last week was week 0. But in week one and week 0, I'm just kind of taking it in. I'm not looking to like be proven right or to have any concrete takeaway. I'm just looking to see like what does Graham Mertz look like, not whether he sucks or not, or he's a bust already, or these quick proclamations. I think that there's equal chances we watch him and he looks similar to what we've seen already, and that wouldn't bode well, although it's Utah. So, how did he look and why did he not look good? But, yeah, I just can't wait to take it all in and see how Utah minus Rising is able to, to play off of that and help support Bryson Barnes. So, yeah, that's a good game that I don't really know which way to lean. I'd lean Utah even with the Rising news, but that's going to be a fun one.
You brought up an interesting point without anything meaning to it. This might be the last year that week 1 might not ruin your season anymore.
Yeah.
Because going to the 12-team playoff, this might be the last year that week 1 does not ruin your season. Where that, non-con game that you scheduled and everybody's fired up for and you lose by 17 points and then you win the other 11 and then you get down to the end like, well, you did lose that one by 17 early in the year when, you're coming off of camp. Maybe you had your best defensive lineman and linebacker out. Maybe there's a kick return in the game. Like those are the things that happen. But even the committee educated on college football as though they may be, and they're supposed to be the most. Sometimes the further away you get from a game, people forget or conveniently forget what you've done since then.
And let's also not be naive that there are certain narratives of certain teams, if they lose early, it doesn't matter. And some teams that are trying to knock on the door, they almost feel like it's imperative that they win early. But I think you're right. Now that the expansion of the playoff is getting to be going to 12 here in a year, that yes, it gives everybody a chance to have a mulligan or a shank or maybe even a hickey that in the past you just really, unless you were a certain group of teams, you couldn't have.
Well, and look, for this example, when we'll talk about this game later on, I know, but LSU and Florida State, that game, as long as it's close as people think it is, if it's played within the spread one way or the other, then it doesn't really matter for either of them. If they do win the rest, it matters, but it's not going to hurt them as much as it would hurt somebody else if they lost.
Yeah, I mean, at least for Utah, if Rising's not playing, then you could lose this game. As long as you lose close, then you can look back and go, well, hey, Rising didn't play in this game. So long as he comes back and performs well and you go take care of business. So, yeah, there's a little bit of insurance there that even if you lose this game, it's not end-all, be-all. And, certainly moving forward, I think you can almost add like an extra loss to everybody and say for the most part that everybody's going to have that extra buffer room because the field's going to be larger. So whereas now we become accustomed to one loss or even a 2-loss team playing for a title in theory, like now you're going to probably have a year where there's a 3-loss team who's playing, in the playoff. Most likely that's going to happen at some point, if not pretty quickly. And, that will depend heavily on where they're from and who they'd played and all of that. But, I mean, you could see that, and you would never have seen that before. But at least as far as this year, yeah, those stakes are still high where there's only the 4 teams. I think Utah is where I lean with this game. I think defensively they're still going to be stout, and that who they have at quarterback's not going to matter in that regard. And there's a lot of questions about Florida's offense. So that's the matchup that I think swings it in favor of the Utes. Not to mention, the fact that it's going to be at home to start things off with. But yeah, that's a fun game, and to have it tomorrow night is going to be great to just roll out of here and go straight into a big time college football game.
One of the things about the game Florida State LSU are those I love the early non-conference, what I call like bangers. You can sit there and say it won't hurt you, and it probably won't unless you get drilled, and even then you have plenty of time to make up for it with what you do the rest of the year. But what it does do if you lose the game, because it's still 4 for this year, then it expands, is that means that's one less game you can lose down the road.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
It's probably as opposed to a bullet wound, it's more of a knee scrape for them.
Yeah,
but
no, it is.
Yeah, because for a lot of teams, like you lose that week 1, it's like, well, there you go. Kiss it goodbye. Yeah, it was one of the things that was so strange to me where watching the Swamp Kings documentary where they're talking about, look, we lose this second game, we're out of the national championship picture, or we lose here, we're out of it. And you think about, you're really going to have a playoff system where this team full of these dudes are not playing for it, like because they lost to another good team on October 9th. Like, how did this not really, to the powers that be, not hit until the groundswell got too much? You know, that was just so weird. You're like, this team has 50 NFL players on it. 50 guys, and you're not going to let this team play for it if they lose one more time? Like,
well, think about the three-way Big 12 tie year. I mean, an expanded playoff. Texas is in the playoff. Oklahoma's in the national title already. Texas Tech might even have had it.
Might have been
maybe
an
outside shot. They just got beat by OU so bad that year. But yeah, I mean, there's those peripheral teams that you're like, they just had that one loss, and it's like that kept them from having the opportunity to play for all the marbles, knowing they're talented enough to do that. So yeah, and maybe, you know, I'm not confident saying like 3 losses, but I mean, that will depend too on automatic qualifiers, because you could have a 3-loss team go win a conference championship game and then automatically qualify for the playoffs. So all of that will kind of depend on how it works, you know, with these new negotiations. But yeah, I mean, you have a little bit more room for a mulligan, but you don't want to flirt with 2, you know, because for some teams that'll still be okay. For some teams that'll be a death nail. So you don't have that much more room. And for most everybody outside of that AQ spot where, you know, you just upset the other team in the conference championship game, 3 is a killer for you. Yeah. So, you know, having a mulligan early on, not a death sentence, but it does put you behind the 8 ball.
And if you're one loss, say you're LSU and you lose to Florida State, that's your one loss. And you get that second loss, but it's not to Bama or Georgia or someone like that.
Okay, it's South Carolina.
If it's to South Carolina, then you're done, because they're going to be like, oh, well, South Carolina, not as good. You know.
All right, here's